Good evening, everyone. My name is Surabhi, and I'm the CEO of the Education Initiative for the Aditya Birla Education Trust. As it is said, every cloud has a silver lining. In this lockdown, the Aditya Birla Education Academy, a leader in the teacher training domain, is delighted to partner with the leading educationalists from all over the world who have kindly agreed to host a masterclass for us once a week. And to kickstart this initiative, who better than Mr. Malcolm Nicolson? It is a privilege for me to introduce Malcolm. Malcolm is a thinker, a leader with vast experience of curriculum development, leading teams, and enabling significant improvements in key global strategic roles based in the UK and overseas. He has an extensive educational leadership, decision-making, analytical thinking, and problem-solving skills. A cutting-edge curriculum development specialist with an expertise in IB programs and beyond. He is also a published author and a contributor to a number of research projects. Malcolm is the director of Aramis Education, an educational consultancy offering bespoke services specializing in school support for IB program implementation. He has worked with IB World Schools in Netherlands, Hong Kong, Germany, Thailand, Turkey, Sweden, Vietnam, India, Pakistan, and the list can go on. Thank you so much for Malcolm doing this, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to hear from everybody and to see you here at this very difficult time in history. And thank you for reading out that very long list, which might have sounded quite bizarre. It might also give you an indication of the difficulty, for example, with the kind of work I've been doing in the last few years. The difficulty to do that when you think of the lack of travel, the lack of face-to-face. So it's great that we can use this opportunity to actually speak to each other in some sense. Face-to-face would be nice, but let's make the best of this. And if I do cough a lot, please do excuse me. I've got a tickly cough. It's not anything more serious than a tickly cough. I don't have a fever. I'm fine. Don't worry. If I do fall off my chair, though, maybe somebody, I don't know, help me. Anyway, this is who I am. I hope you can see on screen now. That is a picture of me. It's the same person a few months ago, wearing a different shirt. As was just said, I have my own company now, Aramis Education. Aramis is the Latin for we shall be, which I think sums up what I'm all about, really, which is very much adopting a growth mindset and encouraging students and teachers to have growth mindset. We shall be. It's also the motto of my hometown where I live, which is Middlesbrough in the northeast of England. And right now you can actually see me because the window to my side here, we actually have sunshine. We must probably have another 3 days this year left of shine. So it's nice that we've got a day in the northeast of England today. I worked for the IB for 8 years. I was head of diploma program development and head of NY development at different times, which meant that I was responsible for all curriculum and assessment design. After that, I worked in Thailand for 8 years, in Bangkok at NIST, where I first became involved in IB programs. And prior to that, I worked in the UK and in the Bahamas, mainly as a science teacher. And apologies for the cough. I'm definitely not COVID-19, don't worry. So what are we going to cover during this masterclass or webinar over the next hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, as long as we want to take it, really? Firstly, we'll cover the key terms. What are the actual key ideas behind this? We'll think about the challenges for teachers, students, parents, and school culture. If we believe in global citizenship, international mindedness, global competence, or whatever we want to call it, what do they mean? What does it mean for the classroom teacher? What does it mean for the school as a whole? And what we'll do is try and take on an inquiry-based approach to this, which means that you will be asked to think and to contribute. And we have the chat box here where that will really help you. So please get ready to use the chat box, because there'll be nothing worse than have me talk for the next 2 hours, particularly with my tickly cough. And really the way that you will learn and understand more is by contributing and being forced to think and to see what other people are thinking. So we're going to start by thinking about the key terms. I believe there's 7. There may well be more, and you could easily argue for more, but I believe that these are 7 key words and terms around this. International mindedness, global competence, global citizenship, skills, attributes, knowledge, and understanding. I think they're the key terms. But have a think, what do you think those terms mean? What do they mean to you? What does global citizenship mean? What does global competence mean? So if you could just take 2 minutes to write into the chat box now what you think those terms mean, what they mean to you. Thank you, Richard. Cooperation. Hopefully you can now see. I was just told that you couldn't see the screen, so I should miss it before. That was me talking about where I have come from. This is our key takeaways, and these are the key terms. Hopefully you can see everything okay at the moment, and I can see the chat. So keep your thoughts coming. And what you believe these terms mean. Oops. I noticed that a lot of you added some specific skills, which is great. It means that a lot of you have thought about what skills you think are important. Things like resilience, that's fantastic, and we'll talk about resilience as we go through it. Multicultural consciousness, global strategies, this is great. Empathy and resilience, fantastic. Humanity has no, yes. Rapid changing world, yes. Being an aware, responsible, sensitive citizen. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Wider perspectives, yeah. Power of unity, I like that. Open-minded, yeah. I think we'll talk a lot about that as we go through. Accepting differences, which of course is part of the IB's mission, if for those of you in IB schools. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for those thoughts. You've obviously, a lot of you, given it a lot of thought already. You've obviously given a lot of thinking to the ideas here. And these are all the key ideas. You've obviously given it some thought already. So let's actually go through what these terms mean. And then we'll start, once we've established what they mean and what they are, we can then go on to think about how we can incorporate them into curriculum and so on. Okay, let's see if I can get the, oh, your identity, yeah, identity is key. Now, international mindedness, I hope you can see this particular slide, international mindedness. Is it co-taught? This is actually a great quote from Bath University, from Jeff Thompson and Mary Hayden at Bath University. Do you catch international mindedness, or do you teach it? Taught or taught? Their argument is that in many schools, international schools in particular, it's caught because kids are playing with their friends who are from lots and lots of different backgrounds, and then they just catch it. It happens. It happens because kids are negotiating and talking and playing, and it just happens. But their argument is that we do, because not every school has the ability to have such a population, that we do need to think about teaching it, and that's their argument. And they were involved with the IB back in the early days. And international mindedness is a phrase that is unique to the IB, really. The IB created it out of nothing. I think it was Ian Hill, Dr. Ian Hill, that created the phrase. But what does it mean? I worked at the IB from 2007 to 2015, and on arriving at the IB at that time was nearly 40 years old, and they hadn't yet managed to define it. Now, why hadn't the IB defined international mindedness at the point? Well, the main reason is it's really difficult. Again, to quote Jeff Thompson, this is what he actually said: defining international mindedness is like trying to nail down frog spawn. If you think about what that actually says, it's a very difficult thing, or an impossible thing to do. So while I was at the IB did try to define international mindedness, because we kept saying to people, well, the IB programs are about developing international mindedness. But if you don't know what international mindedness is, then why are you trying to promote it? This is what the IB says international mindedness is. And they say international mindedness is a multifaceted and complex concept, etc., etc., etc. Now that is an incredibly difficult statement to get your head around. It's complex, a complex idea, of course, but what you do is then you've got to break it down. What does it mean? Because ultimately, that statement is a lot of educational jargon. If you want to help teachers, parents, students to understand that you're aiming for international mindedness, the last thing you want to do is intimidate people with educational jargon that actually means nothing, because it's just a lot of long words connect in a sentence. That's what this is. It's in other words. I can say that now, having been involved in the development of it back in the day, because it's like a good idea then. But we can just break it down into more simple parts. And actually, it's more simple when you think about what you really is 4 bullet points. Opportunities for sustained inquiry into local and global issues. Okay? So let's keep these key points in our heads. Don't worry about the actual definition. Opportunities for sustained inquiry into local and global issues. Reflecting on our own perspective, culture, and identities. Remember, Kavita said your identity as a citizen. It's exactly it. I'm talking about global issues there. So we're talking about global issues, local issues, your own identity, your own culture, and those of others. Multilingualism. I would imagine that every one of the students in your schools is multilingual. Of course, this is not the case around the world. Multilingualism is really important, and we'll see with later definitions how important this part is. And then a focus on global engagement and service. Interesting to see that service is seen as a large component of this. We did, by the way, back in the day, argue about the term global engagement, because we did worry that it might seem like that was some kind of promotion of war or conflict. It's not what it's supposed to mean. It's the focus is on the word engagement and doing good in the community and working with people, rather than starting global wars. That's not what it's about. This is what, essentially, this is the definition of international mindedness. Just keep in your mind local global issues identity, culture, and global engagement and multilingualism. Now we'll go to the next one, global competence. What do we mean by global competence? Because if we're thinking about global citizenship, what are all the concepts and ideas that go towards global citizenship? The global competence idea emanates partly from US government and also from Harvard Project Zero. If anyone's ever used the Harvard Project Zero thinking routines, visible thinking routines, this is the same people that came up with this, particularly Veronica Boyce-Vancia. And this is quite easy to understand now. Again, there's a lot of jargon in there, but we can break it down into 4 component parts. And it's easier to think about it in those 4 global parts. Someone could be globally competent if they have knowledge and understanding of international issues. If you go back to that IB definition, again, we talked about global issues. There's a theme running through. Work with people from diverse cultural backgrounds. Again, go back to that IB definition of international mindedness, and you've got the idea of cultures, different perspectives, awareness of your own culture and understanding of others. The IB one talks about multilingualism. This one talks about proficiency in a world language. And then this is really interesting, the skills to function. How many of the ideas that you put in your chat box were based around skills, the development of skills, of collaboration, communication, and so on? So this talks about skills. But also think, what do we mean by the word competence? The idea here, the concept is global competence, which helps one to become a global citizen. Now, we are talking here about skills within this definition, but competence really implies more than just skills. It implies skills, knowledge, and actually doing something with those. Okay, so we will come back to this definition throughout, but hopefully this is useful for you to get a background to the theory behind the ideas of global citizenship. Is you need the skills, but you also need that awareness of global issues and different cultural backgrounds. Now, global citizenship, again, there are many, many definitions for global citizenship. This is one that comes from the United World Schools, and if you're interested, United World Schools is an amazing organization. They set up learning for children in various parts of the world where the children would not have had an education otherwise. So if you are looking for some great service learning opportunities, the United World Schools are a great organization. They define a global citizen, and in this respect, people who are aware of the wider world. Again, that comes back to the previous 2 definitions, global and local issues. Respects and values diversity, open and curious, live sustainably. Social justice takes action, which comes back to our definition of global competence and international mindedness, the idea of service and global engagement, and doing something for other people, and the belief that all young people have a right to an education. This is one definition of being a global citizen. There are, of course, many in the world. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of a starter in thinking about what we mean by these terms. Let's think about what it means to be a global citizen. And going back to a lot of the ideas that you shared in the chat box, a lot of you talked about the skills. How do we define a skill? Now, the definition of a skill is many, of course, but things, for example, like the ability to do something. Do. That's the key word with a skill, to do something. Now, an attribute, again, these are all very, very close. We're talking about words like competence, skill, attributes. How often in our professional lives do we use them interchangeably and potentially wrongly? So a skill is something that you can do. A skill can be taught. That's one of the keys. If we go back to that global competence definition and we say that it's skills to function, one of the definitions of a skill is that skills can be taught. You just don't leave them to chance. One could argue that an attribute is the ability to do something, right? It comes from one's own ability, maybe even born with it, but you can develop attributes through the development of skills that lead towards an attribute. Somebody wrote, for example, resilience. Can you teach somebody to be resilient? Because undoubtedly, all citizens are resilient. They're open-minded. But these are attributes, resilience and open-mindedness. But can you teach somebody to be resilient or to be open-minded? I think the argument here is that skills can be taught. You can teach somebody the skills that helps them to be open-minded. And I will use this discussion that an inquiry-based form of teaching and learning is the way in which to develop open-mindedness and therefore help students also to become resilient and so on and so on. So the global citizens, I would argue, and reinforcing what you've said here, it's based upon a lot of skills, collaboration, communication, helping each other, supporting each other, but also attributes. And skills can be taught. Attributes are more to do with who we are as we develop and grow through life. So we've seen that there's lots and lots of crossover between what was said so far. If you think of the discussions or the definitions of global citizen, global competence, and international mindedness, are they all the same thing? Maybe, maybe not. Does it matter? If you're going to be promoting the idea of global citizenship in your schools, then it's actually a good idea to choose a term and stick to it and know that everyone's on the same page. So if you as a community want to talk about international mindedness, then you stick to those ideas of local and global inquiry. You talk about global engagement, action through service, and so on and so on. If as a school you're going to be promoting the idea of global competence, then you talk about the skills to function, you talk about knowledge, etc. But there's the huge crossovers. And indeed, another one, of course, that's come up there is the ability to speak more than one language. I think that's crucial. And of course, most of your students in India have at least 2 languages, quite often more. I speak as a person educated in the northeast of England with very, very limited ability to speak beyond English. And hopefully, at least most can understand my English. I am told at times that it's not understandable, but I'll do my best. So many, many components have crossed over through through our different components. So hopefully you're seeing that there's a distinct amount of crossover. Now, which skills are important? We have talked, roughly speaking, about a lot of different skills, and it was great to see the number of skills that you put in the group chat there. But which skills are actually important? Which attributes? We'll come to attributes later. Now, the world is changing. Of course, at the moment, the world has changed beyond imagination, but the world is really, really changing. So we need new skills. We need to focus on some particular skills that really, really show us that the world has changed and the world is changing and that students need to change with it. It's the expanding role of technology, changing job demands. We're globally interdependent now, like we've never been before. Just look at the reaction to coronavirus, let alone economic interdependence and so on and so on. And of course, we've got environmental concerns. Before coronavirus hit, of course, climate change and so on, and plastic in oceans was becoming, rightly so, the big issues of the day. Yet they're lost a little bit now. But these are the societal impacts. So what are we doing about them? If you think about the research about what skills universities and employers are now looking for, these are the skills of global citizenship. And you will actually see from this that you all shared in the group chat earlier, there's going to be a huge crossover now. This is just a little bit of research I did a few years ago while I worked at the IB. When we were developing something called PTL skills, focused learning skills. And we were looking to see what are the skills that are really wanted in the world. And I'll just run through 4 quick slides to summarize some of that, just to show you how the needs of employers and and the world are changing. What are the recruiters in the US looking at? This is 10 years ago. Communication skills, critical thinking, problem solving skills, ability to work in teams, project management skills, and of course, knowledge of particular subjects or content like mathematics came down very low, as you can see at the bottom. So what does this actually, what are the implications here? If we believe that to develop global citizenship, you need problem-solving skills, communication skills, be able to work in diverse teams. Look at what we're doing now. Have we prepared the students in our schools for what we're doing right now? How are businesses coping with the coronavirus? They're all on Zoom, mainly Zoom, despite some concerns in the USA about its security. The whole world is on Zoom and Skype and Blue Jeans and all sorts at the moment. If our students aren't prepared for a world where this kind of working and problem solving, using technology, if they're not doing this kind of thing now, are they truly prepared for the workplace and for university? So these were the ideas that were seen as the chief ones that they wanted in the US at this time. Now let's think, this was a project that was done with a wider range of countries, but again, a very similar overlap of the type of skills that are seen as being successful for the future, and therefore the skills required for global citizens. Creativity comes in here. Again, critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration, teamwork, etc. If you think about all these skills, think about one's own teaching practice or culture within a school. Are we explicitly and deliberately teaching these skills to students? Could students work in our schools knowing that they have developed these skills and knowing the extent to which they have developed? The next one comes from the UK. Back in 2008, this is the qualifications body at that time. What they were finding was that universities, employers were looking for team workers, independent inquirers. Think, for example, about the demands on students right now during coronavirus, working at home. They need to be independent inquirers, don't they? They need the self-management skills. They need to be aware of their own learning styles and their own needs and their own learning journey in order to do this. But the key there is team workers. Again, we think about our own practices in classrooms or in schools. To what extent are we explicitly and deliberately trying to teach students to be team workers, independent inquirers, creative thinkers? To what extent are we really deliberately doing that? And then the final one, Canada, very similar list again, organized, collaborative, self-regulated. Surely one of our actual goals as educators is to support students to become self-regulated. Now, what does that mean? You know, if we want students to become global citizens, they've got to have that level of independence, a level of metacognitive awareness that they understand who they are as learners and how they can contribute to the workplace, to their classroom, and to know themselves and to be able to guide their own. That's particularly important at the moment, of course. But how have we tried to teach these skills with students? Sometimes we might think that maybe one morning they woke up and a particular skill set was nicely wrapped under their pillow, waiting for them as they wake up, like the tooth fairies visited. And here I have the skills to be a self-regulating learner. These kind of skills need to be mapped out and developed over time from the youngest to the oldest. It just doesn't happen overnight. So if we think now, how do we ensure that skills for global citizenship are taught? We need to be explicit about it. Let's think about skills in subjects. These are skills, and going back to the global competence definition, which talks about the skills to function, one of the 4 pillars of global competence is the development of skills. So we need to be teaching these skills explicitly within our written curriculum, our unit planning, our module planning, our schemes of work, whatever. We need to be very clear and explicit about the skills that we're teaching, and we then need to actually teach those skills and give students the opportunity to demonstrate that they have learned, and then be able to reflect on the skills they've learned and to what extent. That's absolutely crucial. One of the 4 pillars of global competence is their skills. If you just think, because I'm a good teacher, it's happening, well, it might be. But we have to be very deliberate about the planning, deliberate about the teaching of these skills. You can't leave it to chance, to hope. Because I'm a great teacher, it will happen automatically. So we need to be very deliberate, very explicit. But do we give students a chance to learn, practice, demonstrate skills outside the classroom? I would argue that we do. Many of you have sport events, arts events, outdoor education, theatre, you name it. Events that happen outside the classroom. Think of those skills that are really important today. Communication, negotiation, attributes, resilience, for example. Think of those skills where students need to be learning to collaborate, communicate, and to actually maybe even find consensus if there's a disagreement. A lot of this happens outside the classroom. Or do we have separate lessons? This is a model that is absolutely working in a lot of schools, but not all schools. You might have separate research skills lessons or separate thinking skills lessons, taking from Edward de Bono or using Harvard's materials. There's all sorts of different ways to teach skills. But if we go back to those international mindedness and global competence definitions, they emphasized skill development. So important to be clear about the skills. So at this point, I now talked for 20 minutes. It's now a chance for you to talk via the chat box. Which skills are you teaching? Give examples, please, of specific skills that are taught in your schools, where they're taught, how they're taught, which specific skills for becoming a global citizen are you addressing in your schools, and how? Because I tell you, once we see these lists coming through from you, we're going to learn from each other more than you'll learn from me. So please share, and we'll learn from and with each other. Okay, thanks, Bhavya. Reflections. Now tell me, where do you teach reflections? Which teachers? How often? Let's be specific. So skills of reflection is great, but who's teaching it? Is it every single subject? Is it just the maths teachers? Who? Yeah, great. Communication through group discussion and show and tells. I like this. Critical thinking and ethics. Tell me, who teaches these? Is it every subject? Is it some subjects? Yeah. Thank you. Oh, feedback. So makerspace challenges. Fantastic. Yeah, teamwork in language. This is brilliant. I like that. The global concerns on plastic. Ask them to design a world without practice now, without plastics. Yes. It's an interesting point. If collaboration is part of the ongoing pedagogy, then students will become more collaborative if it's emphasized again and again and again. Making DNA out of edible materials. Nice. Spaghetti, I presume, or noodles. Yeah. Empathy is a wonderful, wonderful one talk about. We must talk more about empathy and compassion. I mean, it's great. That's brilliant. Making when you're out of the floral waste. Fantastic. Oh, that's interesting. So you've got a mix of school and out of in class and out of class. Yeah, peer feedback. That's fantastic. Ah, interesting. We can be coaches. Vertical gardens, nice. Oh. Wow, brilliant. Thank you for all these. Just finish off now. It's fantastic. Hit loads and loads of skills, and you've gone even beyond that. So we've gone. We've got a lot of attributes in here, a lot of life qualities. So thank you very, very much. So there's a lot of sharing of skills here, and we will talk more about skills later, because I'm afraid to say I will be asking you to think a lot more as we go through this. So some great examples of skills. Let's think a bit now about attributes. Which attributes are necessary? Now, if you're a school that's got fieldwork programs, we have our 8 attributes that they talk about. IB schools have 10 attributes in the learner profile. Oh, thank you. Design thinking activities are great, by the way. Yeah, I love them. Think about attributes. Now, we talked about attributes are different to skills. They're more about the ability sometimes that you're born with, but you can develop them through the development of a range of skills. Now, let's think about which attributes are necessary to be a global citizen or to become globally competent. And earlier, many of you have submitted things like be communicators, collaborators, social skills, open-mindedness. So, exactly, open-minded. So we think of things like that. If we talk about there are skills of collaboration, but we want attributes like balanced, principled, open-minded, you are more likely to be globally competent, to demonstrate international mindedness, or to be a global citizen if you are able to demonstrate that you're a communicator, a collaborator. And I love these words coming through. You're reflective, the cooperative. You want someone who has compassion. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that we saw earlier in the definitions that action, service is a big part of it, global engagement, being connected to global and local issues. But you need people to be open-minded to appreciate different perspectives, different cultural viewing, as well as understanding their own identity. But you also need compassion, consideration, yeah, being considerate. So, you know, I know Cambridge fieldwork and the IB don't necessarily use the word compassionate or empathetic, but this is what we're talking about. How can we help people be compassionate? What do we need to do with learning? Taking initiative is a great one. So, which attributes are necessary? Now, I would say, exactly as you've all been saying, open-minded is so important. It's so important to be open-minded. It really is. But which other ones are important? You're sending in some fantastic attributes now. Open-minded, compassionate, empathetic, resilient. These are all the attributes. But if we go back to those definitions, how do we get there? Now, both the international mindedness and global competence talk about getting there via inquiry. How do these attributes like tolerance, initiative, confidence, compassion, empathy, how do they relate to inquiry-based teaching? What is the difference between a more didactic approach to teaching and inquiry-based teaching and learning with respect to developing these attributes? What's the difference? Surely, if you're a didactic teacher and you're lecturing your students for an hour, surely you can tell them what it is to be compassionate, what it means to be tolerant, what it means to be open-minded. You can certainly do that. Through that type of learning where students have, let's say, what they do or how they do it, and little scope to actually be free to explore through inquiry, then you're providing with the opportunity to demonstrate. And that's the point. We can, through didactic teaching, tell people about. And I think one of the new words I think is now in the dictionary is whataboutery. I think that's a great word. And that's the first time I've ever used it out loud. Whataboutery. So in a traditional form of teaching, we can teach kids about being compassionate and about being resilient, but they don't have the opportunity to struggle, to have to deal with their colleagues, their workmates, their teammates. They don't have the opportunity to think beyond what they're given. If you're just giving them a recipe approach, they don't have that opportunity. So we've got to provoke and stimulate the students. And I would argue that inquiry-based teaching and learning is the way to support students in the development of the skills and the attributes to become global citizens. We must use an inquiry-based approach, in my opinion. Now, many of you have, thankfully, I just see from the group chat, given lots and lots of ideas already about your ideas around inquiry. I'm actually quite pleased with myself that I've managed to work out how to see the group chat and my slide presentation at the same time. I never thought in a million years I'd be able to do it, but I go back to my company's name, Eramis, we shall be. We did do it. I managed to work out how to do it. The next stage is I need to work out how to read and talk at the same time. I think I'm just about managing that. So we have a number of different types of inquiry. And it's important to realize that there are many types of inquiry and different circumstances demand different ones. These are just three, but many more types that you can talk about. Open inquiry is more like student-initiated inquiry, but there are many titles you can give it. But we could talk in rough terms about structured, guided, student-initiated or open inquiry. In a structured inquiry, of course, you give far more structure, more of a recipe approach. In the open-ended or student-initiated inquiry, students are more likely to come up with the direction, what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. But how does this relate to skill and attribute development? If you're teaching through inquiry, and particularly, as somebody said in the chat here, a collaborative way, if your pedagogy is generally collaborative and is generally inquiry-based, then students have to develop skills and demonstrate the skills of collaboration, of creativity, critical thinking, in order to get to the end. Now, the end point might be different. From one group of students to another group of students, the end point might be different, which is where the teacher actually needs to demonstrate some open-mindedness. But if you can give students provocations or stimulus materials that mean that they have to engage with materials that they've never seen before, or as many exam boards call it, unfamiliar situations. Cambridge and IB love that phrase. To use their skills in unfamiliar situations, then they're having to be open-minded. And also, if it's sufficiently challenging, they absolutely have to demonstrate, they are resilient and able to deal with all sorts of obstacles. Can I record the meeting? I believe that the ABEA team are recording it. but they can let you know that through the chat box. So, skills and attributes, I think it's essential to use an inquiry-based methodology to do that. Now, there are a number of verbs that are useful again. We could talk about examples where teachers might say research the, research photosynthesis, research respiration. You can tell I'm a biology teacher, can't you? But what words can we use that will stimulate students to be firstly motivated and secondly to become engaged and then to be excited about what they're doing? So use phrases like seek, discover, question, uncover, challenge, discern, inquire into, which really does make a difference. People get excited by the use of these kind of verbs. So keep that in mind. Using the verbs actually helps when we talk about an inquiry. Now, what about the types of questioning? Again, we want students, as we said before, to become open-minded. We also want them to have to struggle, which helps them to become resilient. Using the IB's command terms is an excellent idea. Using words that Costa is actually based upon Bloom. Everything that we ever did at the IB in terms of command term development and so on was based around Bloom. Everything comes from there, and the slightly revised Bloom's taxonomy. So if you think about questioning, where we do need to have some factual questions, we do need that level 1 from Art Costa's questions, because any inquiry is based on the knowledge of facts. Knowledge is important. Think back to the global competence definition. Knowledge of global issues is important. It's not just about can they use that knowledge and apply their skills, they have to have the basic knowledge as well. So throw in questions that are simple, identify, state, list, select, etc. Before we then move on to the more debatable, the more conceptual questions, inquiry. So the way that one structures inquiry through the use of verbs, through the clever use of different types of questions, not just one question, but different types of questions, maybe 5 or 6 altogether. This really helps students to develop the knowledge, but also enables them to show that they are demonstrating skills and developing attributes such as open-mindedness. It depends on the type of content you choose. You may see empathy and compassion being developed as well. Now let's think about the attributes for global citizenship. We talked before about skills, in class, outside class, separate courses. Can we develop these attributes in class? Do we develop them in class? Do we ever deliberately set out at the beginning of a lesson and think, right, this unit or this lesson, I'm going to create activities that enable students to demonstrate their resilience or to learn about and demonstrate their open-mindedness, compassion. Can we create MUN situations, Model United Nations situations, or debate situations where students have to be able to argue from both sides, where they must show empathy, not sympathy, but empathy? So what are we doing in our classes to deliberately develop attributes? What has that been? I've chosen a couple of images here that are deliberate. Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme, it's also known as the International Youth Award. Something that I did when I was a tiny little boy many years ago. Actually, I've never been skinny, I'm 6'5", but when I was younger, Duke of Edinburgh Award, where you're having to do expeditions, hiking, carrying large packs with you, camping overnight, you will struggle. At some point, you will struggle. I like the idea of civic responsibility, therefore. Actually, that's a great point. Civic responsibility does need to be more on curriculum. Who gets it there? Is it down to science teachers, the humanities teachers? Who does it? But I would argue that a lot of attributes can be taught, or not specifically taught, but students can have opportunities to show, demonstrate, and improve various attributes in a number of ways, both in classes and outside. But I think outdoor education is great. So going back to the original question there, can we teach attributes? Well, maybe we can't teach them like you can teach a skill, but we can provide opportunities both in class and out of class for students to demonstrate that they are resilient, that they're open-minded, that they're compassionate, principled, ethical. All those great words that we see in Cambridge programs, fieldwork programs, IB programs, they're all relevant, they're all important, and none of these are cliche, they're absolutely vital. So yes, I would say that we can enable students to demonstrate attributes, maybe practical demonstrations, yeah, I would agree. So let's just reflect for a little moment here on the global competence. We can't talk much here about the proficiency in a world language, because your schools are either doing that or you're not doing that. Field trips is a great one, by the way. Field trips, fantastic, I agree. Be it outdoor ed or a geography field trip, or a science field trip, or an arts field trip, who knows? But the key points here are, how do we demonstrate, how do we work with knowledge and understanding of international issues? How do we enable students to work with people from diverse cultural backgrounds, particularly if you're in a school that does not have a diverse cultural background? And then we're talking about the skills to function. That's just a little reminder of what we had earlier. So what will our classrooms look like? Well, it won't look exactly like these classrooms, because these are not your students. However, the point of this slide is that it goes back to what somebody said earlier in the chat box. Our classrooms have our collaborative spaces. If we are teaching through and with inquiry-based teaching and learning, there will be an awful lot of collaboration going on. So that's really important, is the nature of the classroom. How do you set up is important. If you want to develop global citizenship, think about the seating plans. In my 8 years working for the IB, you'd be amazed how many schools I went into where students were still sitting either as individuals or sitting in rows staring at the teacher. More and more now you see students sitting in groups or with flexible seating plans where teachers can change the seatings around depending on the activities. But there are still an awful lot of classrooms where students are sitting on their own. And we cannot help students to develop these global citizenship skills of collaboration and creativity if they're sitting on their own. So that what the actual classroom is set up like is very important. But how about what we're teaching? We go to the international mindedness and global competence. The knowledge and understanding of local and global issues is key. But how do we do that? Many of you will have syllabus materials that are prescribed to you, either by government or state. Oh, thank you, by the way. Teaching skills cannot happen in a void. They need to be very knowledgeable, yeah. And let's say at the moment we've got plenty of time to keep an eye on the news, don't we? So yes, we need to be really thinking about our place in the world, be as knowledgeable as we can be, so that we can then support students in thinking about what's happening in the world. Project-based learning is a great example, and teachers need to be prepared for some of that project-based learning to go in a direction that they might have. But if you have a prescribed syllabus, say from state, from country, IB, Cambridge, whoever, you have a prescribed syllabus. A lot of the global citizenship or global and local issues will be in there. But a lot won't be. So there will be a need for you to actually use some teacher creativity. But how do we do that? How do we get international issues, global issues into the curriculum? I've chosen some examples here from, this is the IB's Diploma in Geography, but it's just to make a point. If you look, for example, at one example, the syllabus points that students need to do is they need to learn how physical processes link the Earth's atmospheric and ocean systems. So you think about that. How am I teaching? That's the sense, that's what's prescribed. But can I help students to develop the global and local knowledge that enables them to become global citizens through that? Now, thank you, mathematics. Now I'm going to ask you to do that one. So one thing you could do, let's say you take a case study And you're thinking of physical processes. Hurricanes are a physical process that need to be learned by students. But the impact of hurricanes on one country and another country might be very, very different. The impact on Haiti and on USA are different. So if you learn about the impact of hurricanes on one country and another country, then the same could be said of earthquakes or volcanic eruptions or whatever. You can then take something like physical processes and put it in a context that enables you to understand more about different perspectives. So you can see it from the perspective of somebody else. Let's think of another point from the geography syllabus. Future possibilities for lessening human vulnerability to geophysical hazards. Now that sounds a bit complicated. I'm not a geographer, but lessening human vulnerability. So again, you're thinking, okay, this is post-earthquake, post-hurricane, post-tsunami, or whatever. What strategies are in place? How do people look to help continuing human development after an event like that? Again, you can look at what did Japan do post-tsunami? What happened in Indonesia post-tsunami? And that's one way to do this, is to think how different countries have done it and why and how. And you are learning from different perspectives. Why did one approach work in one place? Looking at coronavirus, for example, different countries have different approaches. Sweden's approach, for example, is very, very different to India's approach. India's approach is different to the USA. Why? What are the reasons for that? Keeping an open mind and thinking, are there different cultural reasons? Why are scientists giving different advice to different places? What's the nature of population, and so on? And the final example here, how human development processes give rise to leisure activities. Very different. How human development processes give rise to leisure activities. This is from the geography system, the IB diploma. So again, if you think about, you can come up with two or more societies and compare and contrast. This is also very true of, for example, if you think of history. A great way to actually study history is to do compare and contrast. Think of a historical event and compare and contrast with current events. You have to see it through the eye of somebody. And when you see history or geography or science through the eyes of somebody else, you have to demonstrate empathy. You have to demonstrate open-mindedness. You have to be creative in your thinking. So just by choosing case studies, then you can actually have a big impact on what's being taught and how you can actually bring in the idea of local and global issues. Now, somebody mentioned, by the way, mathematics. You talk about mathematics. A wonderful opportunity right now to be talking about mathematics with respect to the mapping, for example. Oh yeah, the role of NGOs is fantastic. Yeah, look at mathematics, the spread corona. That is great. Thank you for saying that. By the way, my chat function had just dropped out, so it's back in again. Thank you very much. Mathematics, we have such wonderful opportunities for mathematics right now. I mean, mapping the spread of corona, comparing one country with another. Why, if you compare the flattening of the curve with Japan against, say, Italy, Spain, UK, Germany, why is the Germany slope flatter? Why was South Korea flatter? What to do? I mean, the mathematics in this is absolutely wonderful at the moment. So the Ebolas one, it's great as well. So thank you, Amita, for that. Now, I've been talking a good one again, so now's a chance for you to think. If you think about content and how we can actually incorporate global issues, try and think of one of these, or another one. Think of something like literary analysis, nuclear energy, mime, if you're teaching mime within drama or dance, or Pythagoras' theorem. How could you, or think of another example if you like someone's just mentioned corona or NGOs. How might you take one of these or another incorporate global issues or international case studies to liven it up and to support global citizenship. So let's take 5 to 10 minutes to ideas in the chat box of how you could actually take, oh, I like that, mathematics behind prominent world monuments, brilliant. So yeah, take 5-10 minutes and share ideas in the chat box about how we could incorporate global issues into curriculum. Yeah. Oh, wow. I like that one. Thank you, Lynn. Oh yeah, I was an ESS teacher. I like that. Just take another 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll carry on. Yeah, yeah. What are they capable of understanding and using at a particular age? Yeah. Just take a few more seconds, then we'll carry on. Some amazing creativity coming here. Thank you. A diary, yeah. There's so much rich stuff. And I will get all this written down into one place, and then you'll be able to see this. And this is what inquiry is all about. You know, you can listen to my blah 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 blah, but actually the knowledge and the expertise lies within all of you. And there's 50 people on this webinar, and really the amount of knowledge that you have is amazing, and this sharing is brilliant. Just seeing what is coming through. I was involved with a school in the Netherlands years ago that my kids went to. They used to host TED Talks. That as an experience was amazing. Just the organization of a TED Talk and the whole event and being part of it and watching it and being around TEDs was just an amazing learning experience. And those, you know, those kind of TED Talks, being involved with the day, is something that you can learn in a lesson? Probably not. Is it an important set of skills? Yes. Yeah, comparing air pollution, yes. Yeah. Oh, the use of lyrics. Absolutely. Maths today. Wonderful. And interesting that somebody talks also about, thank you, Led. Someone talked about UN days. Of course, it's interesting. A lot of schools use UN Environment Day, Earth Day, Women in Literature Day, whatever. There's lots of examples. So that's something that we'll do quite successfully. Make a graph for hand. Yes, hand washing. That, of course, assumes that we've all got hands left. I think by now everybody has washed their hands to such an extent there's probably nothing more than just bones left. I know I've washed my hands more in the last 2 months than I have in probably the last 20 years. But hey, hopefully it's a habit that continues. It's important. Yeah. World Autism Day. Yeah, absolutely. Teaching to conserve water. Yeah, washing hands whilst conserving water. It's the same message as brushing teeth and so on and so on. So fantastic. Thank you for all these amazing ideas coming through. They're still coming through. As I say, I'll write an article about all of this that hopefully you'll all have access to if we publish it. Our hosts from ABEA will publish the article, and you'll get to see all the ideas that have come through. Because as I say, the expertise is here. You have the expertise. So it talks about developing content. And it was interesting, 2 or 3 of you talked about using the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals, we all know what they are. They're the 17 goals that the UN have put together. The idea that by 2030, there'll be no poverty, zero hunger, etc., etc. But these provide an absolutely fantastic framework for interdisciplinary learning that introduces global issues. If teachers are struggling to think of how to incorporate global issues, international issues into curriculum, then the UN SDGs are a great tool or framework. Because what you can do is you can look at them with relations to our local and global. I would imagine that you could look at impacts here from all of it. If you think of no poverty, for example, I'm sure where you live, certainly where I live, poverty is a huge issue. Is there anywhere in the world where poverty isn't an issue? So, yeah, it's important to use these SDGs. By the way, ABEA will talk about the sharing of the PowerPoint and about the sharing of the recording and everything. I'm happy to share PowerPoint with anybody, but it might come through our hosts rather than through me. So I think the SDGs, get yourselves familiar with the SDGs. If you're not already, not only do they provide a great interdisciplinary framework where students can learn in a local and a global context, or global, as we call it these days, but also there are great resources on there. And this is where the action comes in. For each one of these Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, the UN has groups, activities going on. If you go, I could think of a few examples. If we're looking about, there was one I was looking at the other day, even sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production. They have a great project going about the fashion industry, for example. How can the fashion industry be more responsible in its consumption and production, which links then into the circular economy, the ideas of dining out less waste so that we're not wasting so much material. So it goes beyond reduce, recycle, reuse. It actually talks more about the circular economy and designing from the very beginning of reduction in waste. So many of these actually have actions attached so that students can develop either their own action or add on to actions that are already proposed by UN. In that sense, it talks back to the IB's International Mindedness one, when they talked about global engagement. One of the ways in which to develop global citizenship is to increase global engagement, which could be through service and action. So you can use these SDGs for students to get involved in service on many different levels, from indirect action, for example, writing letters to NGOs, writing letters to companies, raising money through bake sales, etc., through to direct action, actually doing something, maybe going into local areas and helping with education or food banks or what have you, cleaning plastic out of oceans, rivers, ponds, whatever. And then there's the advocacy as well, where students might want to advocate for a particular direction and really get involved with lobbying. You know, there's a lot of talk these days about how can we support, if we want students to be global citizens, how can we actually support them in being activists? Not activists in any negative connotation, but active in their own learning and active in the results of their learning. They to actually do something with what they've learned and take an action. So I think I couldn't recommend the SDGs more. They really do help as a framework. So let's think now. This is one of the last times I'm going to ask you to think now, but it does save my voice. As you know, I'm going to take off. At the same time, I'm so impressed with the amount of thinking from you. Let's now think about the SDGs. First of all, how many of you are already using the SDGs? If you are, could you please, at this point, go to number 1 here. Describe how you would or how you have incorporated the SDGs into teaching and learning. It's a really good idea to share here. It's all well and good for me sitting here in my back bedroom in the Northeast and talking about using the SDGs, which are fantastic. But how can you share what you do so that then your around India, around the world, can actually learn from you? Because this is inquiry-based teaching and learning. Got to be collaborative, we've got to share ideas. And then if you don't want to do that, you could address number 2. How could you teach coronavirus to your students and develop the components of global citizenship? So let's take another 5 minutes with you thinking and engaging here, please. Choose either number 1, number 2, or if you wish, do both. Describe to all of us how you have or you will use the SDGs, and or how you would teach about coronavirus to develop the components of global citizenship, i.e. how would you help to develop those skills, those attributes, the global awareness, the global knowledge, the ideas, the international nature of this. You know, coronavirus, it's hit everybody in the world. So how would you teach? Thank you. Right, the first ones are coming through. Thank you. Oh, that's great to see. Thank you. An NGO by a student. Wow. Yeah, that's huge. Food security. Thank you. And this, you raise awareness, you learn about it, and then there's an action that comes from it. And that's what global engagement means, taking an action to help somebody. Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Anita. That's incredible. Right, Marianne. Yeah, all 17 goals. You're right. Yeah. Well, good to say. Well said. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah. 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 We may have seen the pictures of deer in the streets of London. Yeah. And would anyone like to answer that question? What's a flipped classroom? 21 days of awesomeness. I love it. Yeah, and hopefully the hygiene will continue after this. It's an interesting one, Marian. Maybe even think of the SDG as the global context. Maybe the SDG is the context for the unit. Just a thought. Probe into capitalism. Wow. Yeah, with having these serious thoughts. Yes. Of course, I was responsible for the team at the IB that with the NY back early after 2010, 11, 12, that time. And we came up with the global context as they were in order to join better to the PYP. But if we'd really thought about it again, might the UN SDGs have been a better way to provide a context? One could argue yes. I don't think that the planning process we came up with was necessarily better than it used to be. Ah, yeah. Yeah, look at how the environment is bouncing back now. The canals of Venice, you can see the bottom for the first time in decades. Dolphins are coming towards the Venice as well. Okay, just take another minute to finish these off. The ideas are incredible. Thank you. Yeah, maybe, exactly. Maybe always bring in the SDGs. The environment is bouncing back, isn't it great? Yeah, it's like the opposite of the zoo now, isn't it? Who's on the inside of the cage? Yeah, yeah. Maybe we need to really think hard about the context for learning. If we're going to help students to become global citizens, then we've got to look, how can we make sure that we deliberately include an action or a global engagement with every unit? If we help, according to the definitions we looked at earlier, if we believe that having an action in the community or within a global issue, a local issue, is important for global citizenship, then we must be designing units that do relate to an action, enabling students to take action themselves or in groups and to make them care. You know, as you're all saying here, they look around now and what do they care? Yeah, which SDG can you relate to? This fantastic pieces here. And also think about who are playing an important role in our country. We know the doctors and the nurses are, absolutely. But what about the people who are serving us in shops? What about the people who are delivering for us? You know, certainly in the country I live in, people may have used all sorts of language that were actually not complimentary about low-skilled workers, for example. Now, delivery drivers at the moment are not what we would call low-skilled workers. They are key essential workers. Have we changed our views as a society? It's fascinating stuff. But I think it's interesting what's coming through from you here is the idea of how we can incorporate SDGs into our unit planning, our schemes of work, our lesson planning. If we use the SDGs, they automatically connect to some kind of an action. And if you go back to our earlier discussion about what global citizenship is, then if you are working in an SDG, if you're working in an ability to do something, get engaged with an action, then you are helping to develop global citizenship. If you're not using content or opportunities like this, you're not moving hearts and minds. And I think one of my big points I'd like to make today is teaching students the skills and attributes and competencies to become global citizens is about moving hearts and minds. Education in the past has been about the mind, getting to learn stuff and regurgitate stuff. But if we can actually move the hearts and minds, then we're enabling kids to become global citizens. You can move the hearts and minds through, if you take your context for a unit to be an actual SDG, take one of the SDGs, then an action comes from it, and hopefully students' hearts and minds are moved. So thank you for all of this. As I say, I'm going to try and write a blog. There's so much coming through from you that it's going to be an extremely long blog. Now, we only have another 2 or 3 slides to go, you'll be pleased to hear. And then we'll have questions at the end, or points that anybody wants to share. So just another 2 or 3 slides, and then we'll go into thinking about next steps, and then open question answer. I'm not going to talk all the way for the next half hour, don't you worry about that. But let's think about this for a provocative statement. 3 F's, good or bad. Now, a lot of you will, and there's been a lot of messages through here as well about the 3 F's. We would talk food, flags, and festivals in any order you like. Food, flags, and festivals, the 3 F's. Are these a good thing or a bad thing? Is it bad to have your International Day at school? Is it a bad thing or a good thing to say, okay, everybody bring in food, I'm going to celebrate the foods from around the world, and we're going to have students walk with the flags? Now, a lot of you are saying it's good. Of course, this is good. It's great for community building. It's good for awareness. But here's the danger. A lot of schools will say, we are doing global citizenship because we've got our International Day, we've got our World Language Day, we've got our International Movie Festival. So even if you're not an international school, many schools are diverse, but could you say, even in a school that just has many nations in it, everybody brings a dish from a different country? It does support open-mindedness. But the problem with the 3 F's, the food, flags, and festivals, is that sometimes this is all the school does as it moves towards global citizenship. And my argument is that food, flags, and festivals are good. They're a good thing to do, so long as it's not all that you do. And that the main emphasis, going right back to what we had at the beginning, is it caught or taught? Well, you can catch it, if you like, into global citizenship through the foods, flags, and festivals. The experience itself helps you to become a global citizen. It helps, it's good. But if that's a one-off, it happens once in a year, then it seems like an add-on, and the students don't get to really understand what's behind it. What has to happen is, at the same time, a reinforcement, as we've been saying through lessons. We've talked about skills and attributes, the knowledge, the global issues. We have to be incorporating deliberately those skills, attributes, the global issues into a multi-language program. If we just leave it to the foods, flags, and festivals, then we're just not doing enough. We're doing something that is good, but becomes tokenistic. So I would encourage you, yes, these are good days, there's no question about that. But there needs to be, we need to get it into curriculum, we need to get it into the school culture, which is essentially my last point for the day, really. How do we get it into the school culture? It's got to go way beyond the foods, flags, and festivals. Thank you, Marianne. So, how do we get it into the community? Yes, the foods, flags, and festivals will help, and that brings the parents in. It gets the parents interested. But the whole point is here: how can we get the school's leadership, the teachers, the parents, everybody on board with becoming a global citizen? For example, how do we support a community in becoming, say, open-minded? What kind of days can we do? Yeah, appreciating your identity, respecting, understanding your own culture, and therefore respecting other perspectives and other cultures is important. This is where the food, flags, and festivals really do help, of course, with schools and with getting parents on side. But how do we get parents on side when, with, say, for example, we've got to teach, we're teaching through inquiry, and we see that your student, the children are doing all sorts of inquiry that might be considered risky or difficult things to talk about in some cultures. What do we do then? I remember when I was in Bangkok for many, many years and had a parent from a particular country who said that he agreed with all of what I was talking about for the style of education we believed in, including being open-minded. And he followed it up by saying, well, yes, open-minded is good so long as they agree with my government. So it was an interesting take on open-mindedness. I'm not saying which country that particular parent came from. But how do you help the parents to understand? So I'm not going to give you the answer to this. You might have the answers yourselves. But what can you do in terms of open days, open evenings, presentations, to help parents to understand why you're doing it like you're doing it? Because most parents, most people of our age, didn't have an education like this. So how could you say, for example, three-way conferences, you know, parent-teacher conferences where the students are in charge, talking about what they're learning and how they're learning? How can we use events like that to get a school culture where the emphasis maybe goes away from grades and grading and academic, and more towards developing the cultural identity or the development of becoming compassionate? How can you as a school use school reporting to develop the idea of global citizenship? Students are not just measured on an academic level, which is important, but they're also measured on social, how compassionate they're becoming. How do we highlight as a community that certain actions students have taken are seen as every bit as important as academic achievement or certification? You know, for example, how do we show those students who've done, somebody mentioned on here earlier, a student who developed their own NGO. That's extraordinary. How do we celebrate that as a community? How do we celebrate those students who are developing the skills, the knowledge, and the attributes? So there's all sorts of things that can be done. Just think about it. It's something for you to reflect on, I think, is the nature of reporting, the nature of assessment, the nature of communication with parents, incorporation of bringing student parents into school. How do we get parents involved with the service and action? It's all really, really important. How do we get even parents to buy inquiry? Because let's face it, a lot of parents didn't learn through inquiry. You know, I used to argue with my dad all the time. Learn it off by heart was his only mantra. And I can recite everything about isotopes in the world now because of that. It's not a great skill to have. But something for you to think about there, I think, is school culture and the involvement of parents and buy-in through parents. Social media, of course, is a great one. So we're starting to wrap up now because we will come to questions for the last 15 minutes or so. Oh yes, Bavia, to guide parents on FPIP. As the author of FPIP, I would encourage everybody to read it every day, back to front. Please also read the history of the MYP. I wrote that, and I've never yet met anybody who's read it, so please read it. It's got pictures in it. So let's reflect now. What is global citizenship? We talked a lot about the definitions. We've talked a fair bit about some practical ways, and you shared some amazing ideas for sharing. Can we teach it? What can we do? Is it something that's doable in a school? What do you think about in terms of school, in terms of lessons, units, even the organisation of schools? And then have a think, what do you need to do based on what we've thought about today? What do you need to do in the next 2 weeks? Because if you don't do anything in the next 2 weeks about what you've learned today, then you'll never do it. That's what the research tells us. If people don't do something very quickly after an event, then it was a waste of time. So what are you going to do in the next 2 weeks? And then what might you do next year? What's going to change? So please have a think. If you feel comfortable to share any of these reflections now, please do. And another 2 or 3 slides after this, and then we'll go on to questions. So have a think, just reflect to yourself what you've learned and what you might do with it. Mm. Mm. Parent volunteers, nice idea. Oh, I wouldn't do that. SDGs you might not want to be doing with the 4 and 5-year-olds, or even the 10, 11-year-olds. Yeah. Just take another minute or so to share your reflections at this point. Then we'll move to the last 2 or 3 slides and then do some questions. Nice. Thank you, Kavita. And then even have to maybe have the kids work out which is the fake news and which is the real news. Nice. Thank you, everyone, for those ideas. It's good to reflect on what you're going to do next. And if you haven't written something down for what you're going to do next, maybe have a good think in the next few days. What are you going to do in the next 2 weeks? And then what needs to be done longer term? For example, you might be thinking about the unit that you're involved with at the moment, but you might want to think more about a whole school approach as we move forwards. Which really looks at culture, reporting, events, and so on and so on. So thank you. Keep those coming through. As I said, I'll put those into a blog. By the way, someone mentioned my books. The history of the NYP I wrote, it's only available to IB schools. If you go on the My IB, it's there. This is actually a book I did write, DPATL skills with Lance King, if anyone's ever heard of Lance King. Please buy about 100,000 of these. That would help keep my family in McDonald's meals. So as we get here, we'll just think about what you have actually taken from today. This is one of the visible thinking returns. Just downloaded NYP history. It was the history of the NYP from 2010 is the one I wrote, and it's got photographs of important people in it. Now this Harvard Zero thinking routine, to think about what you've learned and if you've learned anything. I used to think that global citizenship was blah, 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 blah. And now I think global citizenship is blah, blah, blah. So it'd be interesting now just to think about, now that you've thought about what you're going to do in the next 2 weeks and longer term, now think about what's changed in your mind. Has anything changed? Good point. Good point. So yeah, if you think about that to yourself, I used to think and now I think, and just think, how has your mind changed? And if you want to share it, please do share it in the chat box. You don't have to share it, but if you want to share in the chat box, thank you, Geeta. Please do share how your thinking may have changed in the last hour and 3/4.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Predictor's going to say a few words.
Malcolm, is it over?
Not yet.
Okay. So thank you, Malcolm. I'm sure it was a great learning and sharing of ideas and questions. We do talk about international mindedness, global citizenship, But in this couple of hours, Malcolm, you gave us a great overview of this. Covering SDG was a great idea, and what I liked, as well as I think so other teachers also liked most, was your touching up on most of the subject areas. Without taking much of the time, I would like to thank Malcolm again for this enriching webinar. A big thank you to participants. There are other webinars and online session in the pipeline. Please do check our website page as well as on the FB page. Participants on the FB Live, a big thank you to you all also. We will share the PPT and blog with each one of you. Please fill the feedback form. It has been attached in the chat box. Stay safe. Thanks again to all of you.
Malcolm, would you like to take some questions, please? I know you.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to Pradipta and team. Thank you very much. But also, thanks to everybody for being so open about sharing ideas. It's really, really wonderful to have people who are happy to share ideas. So please do, if you have any questions at this point, please do share them in the chat box. And thank you for those who are saying thank you. I thank you as well for your thank you. FPIP, it's an IB term, from principles into practice. It's FPIP. Lots of nice thank yous. It's a real pleasure. I mean, I really enjoyed meeting. I hope that I can meet you all in person in India at some point, because we'd hoped that that would happen in person in April, and obviously it's not going to. So hopefully at some point it would be great for that to happen.
I'm sure within a couple of months we will be able to have it over here.
Once the aeroplanes allow us.
Right. Okay.
Well, lots of great questions and comments, so thank you. If anyone wants my email address and so on, it's right here. Oh, Bhavya, yeah, of course. So if anyone wants my email address, it's right there in front of you now. I hope you can see it. malcolm@erasmused.com. And as Pradipta says, the PowerPoint slides will be shared. And I will write a blog about this. It's going to be hugely long now. Thanks to all the great participation. Well, there's no questions. There's lots of thank yous. So thank you very much. I think, yeah. Oh, Amrita's asking if the feedback link could come in again. Ah, there we go. Thank you. So thanks, everybody. I will just hide my face now and get something to drink. Cheerio, great to see you.
On behalf of Malcolm and ABEA, thank you once again for joining in. Do fill in the feedback form and join us for all these master classes again. Thank you and good evening. Hello.